Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to an afternoon in which we celebrate Collegeville Connects. Collegeville Connects is a forum for us whereby we're able to demonstrate once again that Collegeville, Pennsylvania is a great place to come home to. I'm Wright-Riggins, and I have the privilege of serving as Collegeville mayor. Been serving in this capacity since 2018. And in that capacity, I've really been trying to focus on three things in the borough of Collegeville. Tried to become an ambassador for Collegeville and a champion for our community, showing that, in fact, we're a great place to come home to. We're trying to meaningfully connect the citizens of our community with each other, this diverse community, an opportunity to bring us all together. And then also to host what I call crucial conversations, and sometimes fierce conversations. So that's what Collegeville Connects is all about. My hope and prayer is that each and every one of you are doing fine during this time of the COVID pandemic. Post-election, we've just come through a rather vitriolic election campaign, as well as the rising tide of racial injustice. And so I'm praying that you are all doing okay in the midst of that. Before we turn to our segment today, I really just want to give a shout out, talking about connections, want to give a shout out to some of our businesses, a couple of businesses. I think it's really important that we shop locally and connect locally. And two businesses that I'd like to highlight today. One is Shogun Fine Indian Restaurant right here in Collegeville that is on the corner of 2nd and Main Street. A wonderful establishment. They both do delivery and takeout, delivery and pickup. Order something for your family and you can have a wonderful, wonderful feast. The Bonsall family is incredible, not only as restaurateurs, but just as citizens of this community. The other businesses that I want to highlight is Mathnasium. During this COVID crisis, a lot of our kids are out of school. Some of them are struggling, and particularly struggling with math and sciences. Mathnasium really focuses on that, as well as helping kids that are trying to come up to par, and that are also focusing on those that are, say, getting ready for PSATs, SATs, ACTs, and all those kind of things. Mathnasiums, and that is a business, a brand new business, really, here under new management under Renji Karup and Renji Karup and Mathnasium. That's also on 2nd Avenue. So I just really want you to focus locally and support our local businesses. So let's get started with today's Collegeville Connects. And I'd like to welcome to our forum today two people that have been friends for many, many years that are going to focus on Black and white and in between, and looking at how do you maintain and forge a friendship across racial, ethnic boundaries, age, roles, and so forth. And so I'd like to bring to the forum today these two folks, Jan Gross and Heather Levon Viavong. And I'm seeing if I just pushed in the wrong button. Here we go. I say to folks that I am a one-man band here, having to host and do the technology and everything else. Let me tell you who these folks are. Dr. Jan Gross is the Seth Richards Professor of Modern Languages Emerita in the Department of French and Arabic Studies at Grinnell College in Iowa. She holds a PhD from the University of Michigan, and much of her teaching and work has been focused on how theater and dialogue enable us to imagine the other, The other person who is here with us today is Dr. Heather Levon Viavong, who is the vice president at Ursinus College, vice president of community engagement at Ursinus College. She earned her PhD at English from the University of Buffalo, where she specialized in British literature, 18th, 19th century literature, and a number of pieces there. She's also very much involved in mentoring students at Ursinus College. I think I did mention that Janice holds her PhD from Michigan University. Did I say that? Michigan? All right, want to make sure we get our credentials right. But welcome to the stage, both of you here at Collegeville Connects. This is our second edition, and I'm so very, very happy to have you here. And I guess the very first thing I just want to know is, How are you doing in the middle of COVID and then coming off the elections, school, uh, craziness that is happening in our community? How are you doing?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start. I feel like I haven't exhaled in the last year or so. There has been so much going on. Both, obviously the pandemic has been a big thing, but also racial injustice, political divides. It seems like we've just been moving from one shock to the next. So I feel like I'm holding on to a lot of that simply because it's taken, I think, both a mental and emotional toll. And I'm sure it's not just me, it's others as well.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my husband lost his brother to COVID in December.
Mm.
And so there was a moment where I felt like I didn't have enough time to mourn, essentially. And so I feel like I'm still in that space, both in terms of that loss, but also just in terms of other things that are happening in the world. It's been very weighty, for lack of a better word.
Heather, my heart goes out to you. This COVID thing is serious, and my family is dealing with it as well as we're addressing those issues. So my best to you in the midst of that. Jan, how are you doing?
Well, I think to piggyback onto what everyone else is experiencing in the midst of turmoil and uncertainty and especially isolation, I would say I think that's the one part that is hardest to deal with because you're on your own most of the time or you're doing something remotely, which is fine. It fills in, but it doesn't make up for all of the connections that we can't make under these circumstances. Everything has been so compromised, both in terms of the atmosphere in the country as well as our ability to talk to each other and connect with each other. I, at one point, thought that I had lived through the 60s and I wasn't imagining anything that could come close to that. But I have to say that this is really far surpassed what we experienced at that earlier, very tumultuous time.
And at some point later, I want to come back comparing the '60s to some of the where we are now and how that may differ from some of the connection, the period of time in which you and Heather first met. But let me talk to the folks that are tuned in for a moment about the genesis of this conversation. Um, Heather happens to be Vice President of Community Engagement here in Collegeville. She and I have enjoyed a relationship for about 3 or 4 years, and she came here as VP. And recently, she was just sharing with me some of the things that she's been about and talked about a little bit about some of the writings. Let's share some of that with me. And she shared a piece with me that you both wrote, focusing on the issue of Black and white and in between. And it is both a prose piece and a poetry piece that really kind of gets at your relationship, the history of your relationship from when you first met years ago. Is it pronounced Grinnell? Is that the name of the college? Grinnell College there in Iowa. And I was just fascinated by that because it addressed issues of race. It addressed issues of power or roles. It addressed somewhat of a generational difference, if I might say. You and I, Jan, happen to be exactly the same age, so please, it's okay with all that. But I thought it was fascinating the relationship, both a professional relationship and a personal relationship that you two were able to forge in the middle of that. So if you could just maybe both talk a little bit about how did this formal and then informal relationship start, and what has that been about, this Black and white and in between for the last however many years?
Yeah. So I went to Grinnell as someone who was finishing her dissertation, and it was under the auspices of a program which allowed for that. And essentially, I was assigned a mentor, and that was Jan. And part of the program really was about helping young scholars, especially scholars of color, acclimate to the environment of working at a liberal arts institution.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was about helping to, open my eyes in a sense to that environment and the possibility of potentially continuing to work in academia in those types of settings. And so during that period, Jan was assigned as my mentor. And so that was the formal part of our relationship. And that's where it started. And I'll stop so that Jan can.
Let me ask you this. Was this your first teaching assignment?
It was.
Okay.
It was my first teaching assignment as well. So I was, very green at the time.
Okay. Jan, pick it up from there.
Okay, well, I was invited in by the then deans, and we were kind of trying to figure out what was the best way to introduce a new fellow of color, in particular, to our institution, coming from usually a large university in an urban area. Our candidates were likely to be very uncomfortable in the situation of a small rural town in Iowa. And so I was tapped to kind of step in and make things feel comfortable, introduce to the complexities of the institution, but also to make it feel welcome. This was also first-time teaching, so there was a mentoring role in teaching and also in terms of completing her dissertation. So it was a support role, and it was unusual in the sense that I don't think we had gotten much involved in mentoring at that point. And so to put a very established, tenured faculty member in charge of this program or of this individual relationship was something of an experiment, I would say. And I don't know how much it was used or how widely it was successful, but in our case, it certainly.
So what were the demographics of the college at that time in terms of faculty and students and the community?
Well, both. All of it was very predominantly white. Not 100%, but very few faculty members of color. I mean, Heather can maybe comment on that specifically.
I'd really like to hear that, and because it makes me think in terms of maybe even comparing and contrasting with how that is in Collegeville as a university. So you come, Heather, into Grinnell as a young, freshly minted PhD. To Grinnell.
Not quite.
No, not quite, but teaching assignment. And so, how were you feeling, and what were you thinking when you stepped on to this
Yeah, I was afraid, actually, feeling very fearful just about being in this environment. Certainly, a predominantly white environment. I felt like I didn't belong there. I felt like I would be judged just because I was someone of color. In a predominantly white environment, that I would be seen in a particular way and not in a way that was positive, ultimately. So I was really afraid, very scared. And because it was my first teaching assignment, I really didn't understand how things worked and what was expected of me. Certainly, I knew that I had to finish my dissertation, but beyond that, I didn't quite know how to navigate the institution. And so I think, of course, that's why Jan was assigned as my mentor to help me figure out some of those things.
So you were still working on your dissertation?
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
So that even makes it even more interesting to me.
Exactly.
Okay, I got you.
Exactly.
So Jan, what are you thinking as you've been assigned this mentoring relationship with this young African American person that is beginning? What are the dynamics? What's happening there?
Well, I entered into it thinking, well, this will be great. I'm confident. I know what the institution's about. I know what we have to offer. We had Heather and I had similar interests in terms of literary works and authors and so on. And I thought, well, this will be fine. I'll go into it and we'll get to know each other and things will move along. Well, it wasn't all that easy. Because I understood what mentoring was about. I understood what the expectations were. I understood what the college was hoping for and what our core values were. And so I went in feeling like I knew what could happen. But
When you say what could happen, talk to me. What does that mean?
well, I mean, I would do my best to help Heather feel comfortable and answer questions she had. We'd talk about her work, her dissertation work, and the idea of getting used to teaching. How would that be? It was important that I was not in her department. So theoretically, according to this arrangement, it was such that I was enough apart from the department that she was in, so that I wasn't going to be in charge of any kind of oversight or performance review or anything like that. I was really an outside colleague.
You know what I found fascinating in what you wrote is that why you got that separation, this outside colleague piece, and you're mentoring this young African American woman who's coming on board. You yourself are a fairly young white woman faculty member who has been working, and it's breaking into this situation yourself. So you, to me, you have both this dynamic of this African American person, woman coming into the institution, and how do you maneuver that? How you deal with that? And then you've got you, who it's not like they've got a bunch of white women faculty that have got it made in the shade either. So, am I right about some of those kind of tensions and dynamics?
Well, especially if we take the timeline back to when I was hired. Clearly, I was an affirmative action hire. It was at a time in the late 70s when the faculty at Grinnell and everywhere else, for that matter, was predominantly male. And there was a very vigorous effort to hire women no matter what. I mean, I shouldn't say that, not no matter what, but if there were candidates of equal competence and quality, the woman would have to be given priority over in that hire. And so I was hired at a time when there were very few women on the faculty. And I was part of one of the first classes of major hires of women. And it brought back a lot of what I sensed Heather was experiencing on a different level. Now, obviously, the institution has managed to hire many, many women faculty, to the extent that I don't even know where it is now. It might even be more. But at the time, it was very unusual to have more than, I don't know, a handful of women faculty. And certainly not at the highest ranks. I would emphasize that I was hired as an instructor, so it took a while to get to the level of tenure and beyond.
You had written, Jan, I think you had written that affirmative action gains were more easily accomplished with the hiring of including women than it was in addressing the gains of people of color at your university. Mm-hmm. But I'm very impressed by how boldly and forthrightly you said that you were an affirmative action hire, okay? And then you also said, I think you began to explain affirmative action in terms that I'm most comfortable with, and saying the intention of hiring people of competence and quality, all right, but giving preference, or at least looking at that pool of persons qualified who meet a certain criteria to be able to move forward. So I'm just interested, and maybe I'll really start with Heather with this. What was your understanding or feeling about, quote, affirmative action, and how did you see that, and how comfortable do you feel in that setting, Heather, and did you embrace that as boldly and comfortably as I think I just heard Jan did, in saying, I was a woman, white woman, hired on affirmative action?
I was grateful. I was grateful to be hired. I think that was the point.
No, I mean, I think my understanding of it is exactly the way that you've defined it. But in terms of being someone of color, being in that setting, I think that I walk around having this very heightened consciousness about what I look like and who I am in the world in terms of my color. And so it's hard to escape that when you are a minority in a predominantly white setting or at a predominantly white institution, you don't ever feel like you belong. Even if no one is outwardly saying things to you that suggest that, you shouldn't be there. There is this sense that, you don't quite fit, or that everyone is judging you in a certain way, that you don't bring the same credentials, the same academic strength, whatever it might be in terms of what you are contributing to the institution. And so I carried a lot of that with me at the time. And so it was hard to move past that. It took a very long time. I'm not sure I even did move past that by the time I left Grinnell. But it just took a long, long time for me to feel at least a little comfortable with myself in that setting.
Okay. Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. And people of color oftentimes, I know that for, a whole 70 years of my life, I mean, I can have more degrees, I can have more whatever, and still trying to prove myself for people just wonder where he got it because.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. Anyway, having said that, I was not under the impression that you all hit it off initially. How was your relationship at the beginning, and how did that morph? Talk to us.
Yeah. It was, at least certainly for my part, I approached Jan with a great deal of hesitation and suspicion. I thought she was someone who looked at me in precisely the way that I just described, like, you don't belong here. And she didn't do anything or say anything to suggest that, but it was my own insecurity, essentially, about myself. So I thought she was there to kind of check on me, to make sure I fit, make sure I was doing everything right, but also doing so in a way that suggested that, she didn't really feel like I should be at the institution. So I was very, very, very hesitant to form a relationship, to have that mentoring relationship with her. But I also didn't understand what it meant to be mentored as well. So there was that too. It was the first time that I'd ever been assigned a mentor, or have someone formally called a mentor, who would be working with me. And so I also did not understand that relationship and what it meant.
Did you chase that idea of having a mentor? Did that trouble you, the idea of having a mentor?
I'm not sure I really thought about it. I
Okay.
really don't think I gave it much thought at all. I just arrived at the institution, and then I was told, okay, you now have a mentor. And then I had to figure out how I was going to navigate all of that. So I did not see Jan initially as a friend or anyone who would be supportive of me.
And where were you in all of this, Jan? What were you thinking and feeling?
Well, as kind of picking up what I said before, I didn't really expect what I found, what the trouble, I mean, the sort of the reserve that I found when I tried to communicate with Heather. She was very, very reserved, and I understood that she felt very vulnerable, and I really did, in the very beginning and throughout, for that matter, put myself in her shoes, because I was there. I remember those feelings. I remember feeling out of place. I was a first generation college student, and that in itself also brought a lot of insecurity. So I could easily, backtrack and remember how I felt at that point. So I was very sympathetic, but I was also very challenged in terms of how can I manage? How do we manage this? How do I break through this sort of really difficult give and take? I was giving, and I was and she was taking. So I was left with, as we laugh about now, talking a lot. I became a kind of storyteller, reminiscing about what it was like here or there or whatever. And I tried to break down the mistrust that I certainly felt. And at one point, very early on, I remember when Heather asked me, she said, "Now, do you report back to anyone about our conversations?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely not. That's not at all what we're about. I mean, we're just here to, get to know each other and to be a helpmate if possible." There's a lot to be learned about being a mentor. I mean, mentors have to be mentored as well, I think, sometimes.
Mm.
But it was it was challenging in the beginning. We had to, we had to keep working at it. And I think we found strategies for that. We stopped meeting face to face because that was very uncomfortable. And
Hmm.
we ended up kind of looking at each other. I would ask questions and she would like one word answers, and then I would talk more. But then we finally kind of found a pattern of walking. And so we walked on a regular, just pretty much daily. And little by little, walking is very liberating because you don't have to say anything, or whatever you say doesn't kind of stick to anything in particular. And it was just more casual and more regular. And I think that's what really helped us kind of break down that who's she and who am I and how do we manage it.
So, Heather, it sounds like at the beginning you had some suspicions, wondering what this was all about or something.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I did, very much so. But I think, as Jan just mentioned, once we started to walk and talk a little more, it allowed for us to get more comfortable, certainly allowed me to get more comfortable with Jan. And I started to see her in a different way. She wasn't the person that I thought she was initially. Certainly, she wasn't someone who didn't think I belonged at the institution. She had already reassured me that she wasn't reporting back anything that we had discussed. So I did start to feel very comfortable with her, and the walking certainly helped with that. And we also, as you noted earlier, we also started to write to each other. So I love writing poetry, and it's been something that has allowed me to sort of give voice to my feelings. And I started writing poetry and just sharing it with Jan, and I think that also opened up an avenue for us to have more conversation as well.
Yeah, I began by saying I opened up this segment talking about one of the things that's important to me is making connections, and part of what I try to do as mayor is try to get folks connecting with each other, and to hear you say that walking side by side actually became a way for you to connect in ways that became more comfortable, and then the writing piece, that maybe um, the side by side and the writing then perhaps moved more, ultimately led to this kind of face to face relationship and connection. So you two worked together how many years at Grinnell, and now have known each other for how long?
So I was at Grinnell for 16 years, and so we've known each other, what, 20, 21 years?
Yeah, Heather, you arrived in 2001,
Right. Yeah.
and then you left in 2015.
I think so.
Something like
Yes.
that. So how would you describe the in 2 or 3 words, how would you describe the relationship 2001 versus the relationship today?
Mm.
That's a really great question. I mean, obviously we've evolved. I think that, our relationship is really strong in terms of our friendship. Uh, what has been challenging, if we want to see it in that way, is just the distance. It was nice. It's one thing that I really miss about being in Grinnell. That is, having access to Jan, going for coffee, just having more regular conversation, that kind of thing. And now we talk once a week, which is great, maybe a couple of times, just depending on what's happening. But I do feel the strength of our relationship. I feel like it continues to be solid. Uh, I think our trust in each other is still there. I don't think we've lost anything ultimately in terms of our connection to each other.
So, yeah, go ahead, Jen. You're about to say
I
something.
was just going to add that what started as a friendship between two people expanded exponentially into our families, and so we do things together. We've shared vacation times to even as far as Thailand and Paris, and our children have connected in their own ways, And we've kept, Heather, for example, read one of her poems at the celebration of life ceremony for my mother-in-law, who was 94 when she passed away. So there are these connections that are more than just two people.
Yeah, and I think that that's powerful. I think what I want to ask is, in reading Heather, you said something about having been um, on that campus or in that environment for so many years, and then feeling that, with the exception of Jane, you felt like you didn't make or carry over any or many white friends. That's what I think I heard. Then I think I read, Jan, that up until Heather, and maybe even since the relationship with Heather, um, your world or your connection with you did not have many if any connections with African American people up until that time, and I'm just wondering, am I correct in these assessments, and how do you all think or feel about those?
Well, for my own part, I mean, I would say that I do have, other white friends at Grinnell. Certainly none as close as Jan. What I said, I think, is that even after being at Grinnell for so long, I really felt like it still hadn't become like a home for me.
That was right.
And a lot of that, I think, it still has to do with the imposter syndrome. Certainly that still lingered in its own way. But I, at the time, I really felt while I was at Grinnell that I just didn't have, I was still in search of myself, that I still hadn't found my voice in many ways. So it was a combination of things that just didn't make it feel like I was comfortable, like I'd really found my place there. So that's really it more than anything else. But I did have other people there on the campus who were very supportive of me. Certainly white colleagues and friends.
So it was about feeling at home.
Feeling at home, yeah.
Dan, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I guess I would qualify the statement as not being having close friendships with anyone, any African American or any person of color, really. I certainly, part of my research was about multi-ethnic communities in France and French-speaking countries, and so I theoretically knew a lot and believed that and understood, but I never really got the opportunity to really get to know someone as a good friend. And that's the unique part I think we both realized in our years of
so not only did you all walk together, you also described a time of taking a long car trip together. And I thought it fascinating. And you ended up writing a piece around that in terms of that experience. And I'm wondering, Heather, if you can describe from your perspective what happened on that road trip, the incident on that road trip. And then, Jan, if you can follow up with your perspectives at the time or even since about that road trip, the incident that happened on that road trip.
Yeah, so.
Did you want us to read?
That would be wonderful, please. I would love it. I just didn't know you had it in front of you. Read, please.
So each perspective is so different. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Could you read that? Could you read that? As you read this, go ahead and read it.
Yeah. So the piece is called "Driving in Black and White," and I wrote a part, and Jan wrote a part as well. She wrote her own piece. This is mine. When I see a squad car down the street, I wonder if they're coming for me. Awash in guilt for crimes not my own, I slip on the chains myself and watch as I'm taken away, transported through the darkness back to the bowels of the sea. I am shackled between shame and defiance, blood upon blood, sweat upon sweat, the three of us glowing in our blackness, unarmed, carrying the weight of skin and bones as our only property. I want to rise from the depths, shake the trees, empty the sea of its bodies.
Wow. Wow. Let me sit with that a minute. Let me sit with that. Been there. Been there. Thank you. Jan, let me hear from you.
Heather is a poet. I am more prose driven, so to speak. She was driving. The back road was isolated. A police car came out of nowhere. She saw it swing behind us. The lone officer claimed she was speeding. We were from out of state. Tersely, he said it was 50, not 55 or 60, as if we should have known. I showed my face. I explained why we were on this trip. Fearfully, I pleaded ignorance. We escaped with only a curt warning. Did my skin color have anything to do with this?
Wow. How would you answer that question today? Did your skin color have to do with any of this?
It's up for grabs, isn't it?
I recall years ago, I was in Green Lake, Wisconsin, and I had to drive all the way to, I think it's Fond du Lac. I'm forgetting where the airport was, and I was late, and I was with a white female colleague, and we were late for the plane, and I was probably going 70 miles an hour in a 55-mile zone and got pulled over. And when I got pulled over, the first question that the officer, it blew me away because the first question that the officer asked me was, where was I driving her? I was the boss. I was the boss. I was the boss. But because he went that way, my response was, she's late for a plane. I'm trying to get her to the airport. And he said, go right ahead. But unlike you two, she and I never talked about that. Because I felt guilty about using the experience. First of all, I was angry about the experience. I felt angry about him asking me, where was I driving her? Where was I taking her? Then I felt angry about my response. Felt gratified by the fact that I escaped the ticket because of the response. But I knew it was an issue of black and white in the midst of all of that. So that's kind of what I thought about when I read your piece in terms of two very different experiences.
Well, interestingly, what you said is you never spoke about it, and nor did we, actually. We did not really, I think we each knew how the other felt, but we didn't actually speak of it until we decided to start this writing project, and then it came out of our writing, as often.
Yeah. Heather, it's wintertime here in Pennsylvania. We just got a hint of two little flakes of snow fell this morning. But it made me think a little bit too about your poem on whiteness. I'm wondering if you have that with you. That I think that expresses a sentiment as well. Could you share that with us?
Sure. Whiteness. It's like snow that sticks to everything, clinging to the side of tree trunks, branches and leaves hanging low. Such heaviness, even the grass cannot raise its white tips. Yet I must clear a path and lift the burden until my arms are familiar with the motion. Hoist and throw, never one with the snow. And yet there you are.
Thank you for that. So I was also intrigued about another experience that you all had, perhaps more recently. I guess it was probably since your move from Iowa, Heather, to the East Coast, where you went to the National Museum of the National Museum in Washington D.C. and Culture, African American Museum and Culture. I think we would love to hear you talk a little bit about your experiences of that together, and how that what role that has played in your relationship, your friendship, and some questions perhaps that raised for you.
Yeah. Well, it was Jan's idea that we go there, and we just happened to note that we would be in DC at the same time, so we arranged an outing so that we could do that. It was a very emotional experience for me personally, just because of the setup of the museum, and you start from the basement where you start to learn the history of slavery, and you kind of work your way up to the end of the history of the African American experience, where it seems more hopeful, and there is a bit more joy, certainly by the time you get to the higher level of the museum. But in terms of the lowest, the basement experience, I mean, I think that was the most challenging for me. I mean, it led us to write a piece about that as well. And in that piece, I really reflect on the fact that, Jan could have been my owner many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Not even many years ago, hundreds of years ago. I mean, it really could have been that. That's the kind of relationship we could have had to each other.
Certainly.
And so just thinking about how far we've come, in a sense. I know we have so much farther to go, but the very notion that we could go to the museum together and have that experience together really is quite powerful for me.
Jan, what about you? What are your thoughts about that experience?
Well, I have to say it really was something I wanted to do for as soon as I had heard about the museum opening in DC, and my daughter was living in DC at the time anyway, and still is. And I really wanted to see the museum, and the more Heather and I worked toward a focus, I would say, on our difference. Of skin color, specifically our difference. And we hadn't really managed that. We hadn't really talked about it in any way, in any particular way other than in the driving section. But I really wanted us to be able to reflect on this experience and have it be kind of a culminating moment for our writing and for our thinking, really. I needed to understand that historical underbelly. Actually, I'd call it a DNA of sorts that I needed to. I needed to understand it better, and I didn't want to go to the museum by myself or with another white person. I really wanted to experience it with Heather, and it was difficult. I didn't feel comfortable at all, and nor should we. Nor should anyone feel comfortable going through the history of the slave trade and the international component of it, as well as the national. And I just needed to know. I needed to be able to talk about that with someone who felt it in their bones, and I really appreciated that experience. I felt out of place, I'll say.
Sure.
There were, by and large, many more Black visitors than whites, and I was really proud and glad to be there with Heather. It made me feel more, I don't know, not even empowered, but just a part of it that I wanted to understand and share in.
I've only been there once, but I just want to encourage folks to get an opportunity to go. I can't wait to get back again. I'm curious.
Just one thing. I said to Heather, I think every elected official in this country needs to visit that museum, and probably the Native American Museum as well. I think
really want to go there too,
about our American history, and after all, DC in particular was built by slave populations, enslaved And
And
so
I didn't even know that the Native American Museum was there until I went to the other museum and passed by and said, "Oh, I've got to get back." But thank you for that.
there's so much we need to understand and experience that way, and not just on a superficial look at somebody and react, which is
So, we've talked a little bit about, the whole race piece, and time is moving quickly. But we talked a little about the race piece. But I'm wondering, has age or generation played any factor positively or negatively in your relationship? It struck me, Jan, when you wrote about your experiences in Detroit in 1967, which reminded me of my experiences in Los Angeles at the same time. And then it clicked to me, oh, Heather wasn't even around. Uh, wasn't a speck in her mother's eye or whatever. Um, I'm just curious. Um, do those generational experiences that you two have had or not had together play any role in your relationship?
I'm gonna let you start, Jan.
I I guess I don't really think so.
Okay.
Not from my perspective, at least. But it's hard for me to say. I mean, I felt like I had lived a lot more. I had had more experiences that I could share, that I could draw on, and make make connections that maybe somebody who was much younger than me couldn't make.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think it was an advantage.
Because it strikes me sometimes that, I will think about the assassination of King, April 4th, 1968.
Mhm.
And I just, everybody's experienced that as far as I'm concerned. And then I will look at someone like Heather and say, well, no, not really. It cuts me to the bone. I mean, I remember it like yesterday. And I was just wondering if those kinds of experiences, whether it's about that or just pieces that you've experienced coming up.
Yeah, I mean, for me, certainly, having a sense of Jan when she was growing up in terms of that period, the 60s and so forth. I, I think when we first started becoming friends, I started to wonder, well, if she ever had a Black friend, or where was she in relation to like the civil rights movement, and what did she think about that?
Yeah.
And I mean, those were the questions that I had. And I mean, ultimately, we've been able to talk about some of those things. But initially, when we were not really talking about race in that way, and those types of movements, I was just wondering, but I had not yet asked any questions. But
Yeah.
we did get around to it.
Well, both of you have kind of, your academic backgrounds go back to the 18th and 19th century. So I imagine that you just feel just as at home in all kinds of eras of history, not only the late 20th century, but all the way back. Yeah. We're going to have to wrap up in a minute, but I'd like to ask you a series of questions that are perhaps a little bit more personal, if I might. All right. All right. All right. So I'm actually going to ask one question of one of you and then a question of the other. So you both won't answer the same one. But here you go. I'm going to ask, Jan, what do you most admire about Heather? What do you most admire about Heather?
I would use the word strength. And I don't mean that, although maybe I do mean that in the gym as well. She's a very strong, muscled person, but seriously, strength of character, strength of conviction,
Hmm.
and strength of purpose and resolve. I think she's a person who's with great integrity and who is forthright and steadfast and can always be counted on.
Great, great, great. Now I know there's no such thing as a dumb argument, but Heather, what's what's the dumbest argument you and Jan have ever had?
I don't, we haven't ever really argued. I mean, I think early on we might have argued about, Jan not having time to go for a walk. And I was feeling like, well, you should have time. but we were at such different stages in our lives. And I really just needed to be a little more understanding of that. And I wasn't at the time, but I think because of the age difference, we just don't have arguments. We really don't. We
Okay.
really don't.
I love it. I love it. Okay, Jan, who's the better listener between you and?
Well, I think obviously if you look at how much I talk versus Heather,
I knew the answer to this one.
as a good listener. That's not to say I'm not a good listener, but I think she clearly has mastered the art of deep listening, and I think that's something we both value, and I think that's a big part of why we've been able to communicate on so many different levels, is that we really do care about what someone says.
Okay.
And listening is.
I think I know the answer to this question.
I give her the prize, but
You get the prize for that. All right. I think you're going to get the prize for this question that I asked of Heather. Who's the best sharer?
The best sharer? That's Jan, for sure.
Okay. All right. I'll ask this of both of you. Is it more important for your communication to be, for you, is it more important for your communication to be authentic or to be kind? What's most important to you, for it to be authentic or to be kind?
I don't see that as an either or proposition. In fact, if anything, I think if you really are authentic, you need to do so with a certain level of kindness. Because if you are authentic and unkind, I don't think that's a very productive way to be. But that's a judgment call on my part. So I think we want to be, or I want to be authentic, but I also am incapable of not being kind along the way.
I think we both value, being authentic with each other and certainly being kind. I would give the edge to the authenticity piece of it, simply because of how we started. And as we continue to become friends, it was important for us to be honest and authentic with each other. I think we made ourselves very vulnerable. And, once you've done that, you just have to be friends. There's like nothing left. So I definitely value both. I think we both do, as Jan just said, but certainly the authenticity piece, being authentic is crucial.
I think I heard you both say that you've been to Thailand together, to France together, and some other places together. I'm just trying to figure out how I can become your road buddy too. But on your road trips, what's the biggest laugh that you two have shared? What's the biggest laugh?
Yeah. I can't identify anything in particular, especially between us. I would say that, we laugh a lot when our families are sitting together at the dinner table, and we're talking about, who knows, it could be politics, it could be anything. But those are the moments when we really share a lot of joy in being together, and there's a lot of laughter and love too. So.
Jan?
Well, I think I can't think of anything in particular that brings us laughter. I mean, it makes us laugh, other than self-deprecating. Sometimes we like to laugh at ourselves. We're good at that and enjoy it. But also, especially with our families, and the travels that we've made internationally have always been with our families. So,
wow,
that was different.
Well, listen, I really want to thank you both. The words that come to mind as I reflect on our conversation today. I remember a song we used to sing in the movement and in the church that went something like, "Walk together, children, and don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting over yonder." And you two have walked together for a score of years, and which has allowed you to then come and connect with each other very authentically face to face, and you have an incredibly authentic relationship now that has survived all of the craziness that our world has gone through, and I'm grateful for that, and the idea that you continue to work at it, and you're writing together about it, and just makes me so very, very happy. And I think you epitomize what we're trying to do here in Collegeville, that is connect with each other, to have crucial conversations with each other, and to get to know each other in powerful ways. I heard Bishop Michael Curry, just yesterday on another call, talked about in these times how very important it is that we come to the table together. And to hear you both say that it has been, as you brought your families together, breaking bread at the table, coming to know each other. I don't think that there's anything more powerful than that, than breaking down these barriers, whether that's about race or gender or age or anything else, that as we come together, walk together and break bread together, it makes a difference. So I'll give you the concluding words and then we'll say goodbye to everybody.
Well, just thank you for inviting us to be a part of Collegeville Connects. It means a great deal. So I'm grateful for this opportunity, and being able to talk to you and Jan in this way, it was a great experience. So thank you for offering it to us.
Thank you.
Yes, and again, many thanks for inviting us to come together in a public forum. I guess we were very nervous about this because we've been working on this project for many years, and this is the first time we've gone public with it. And we hope that that what we're doing can have legs beyond just the moment, because we care about allowing our vulnerabilities to become our strength.
Thank you so very much, both, for giving us this glimpse into black and white and in between, and this memoir and the sharing of your relationship and your journey. And we look forward to the time when it will become more public, and folks will be able to get that in their hands. You've been a blessing and to me, and I think to so many of the rest of us. So thank you so very much, and I look forward to the next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for being a part of this. We'll see you again on Collegeville Connects. Bye-bye.